body for volunteering in New South Wales. Grow communities and bring people together through volunteering.
Welcome to the first episode of Voices of Volunteering. My name is Clint Burtonshaw, Director of Sector Development and Engagement at the Centre for Volunteering. In this episode, I'm speaking to Kylie Elliott, Volunteer and Supporter Engagement Lead for the Sydney Children's Hospitals Foundation. We are here with Kylie Elliott from the Sydney Children's Hospitals Foundation, and we're going to talk a little bit about her role, why she does what she does, what the Sydney Children's Hospital Foundation does, and most importantly, the journey they embarked on with the national standard. So Kylie, welcome.
Hi, thanks Clint. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely my pleasure. And we have known each other for quite some time through the Centre for Volunteering and the work that you're doing. And it's always amazing just to hear the milestones you are hitting with your program, with how you continue to attract and retain volunteers, and most importantly, how you guys have achieved the national standards. So I want to get started by asking you, tell us a little bit about the Sydney Children's Hospitals Foundation. What's the organisation, what's the mission, what's the objective, and what brings you to the organisation?
Okay, so the Sydney Children's Hospitals Foundation is the fundraising arm of the Children's Hospital at Westmead, the Sydney Children's Hospital Randwick, Bear Cottage, which is the only children's hospice in New South Wales, NETS, which is a newborn and paediatric emergency transport, and Kids Research, which are doing amazing things in research. So we need to raise $70 million a year to keep those entities going. So we have a very important role. I've been here for 4 years, coming up this July. Before I started, there wasn't actually a volunteer management at all. Volunteer management was done by many amazing staff members over the different locations, and they realised it was, as volunteer management can be, it can be quite ebb and flow. So they thought they'd get a volunteer coordinator to come in and start it. So I started out as a coordinator nearly 4 years ago, and I'm now the volunteer and supporter engagement lead.
Right.
So, yeah.
So what, in that role, what does a day-to-day look like?
Day-to-day?
Apart from drinking a lot of coffee too, and that's $70 million a year.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's amazing. So our tagline is All In for Kids Health. So we have a lot of entities, the 5 entities that we fundraise for. So with that comes a lot of fundraising events. So we have volunteers at most of our fundraising events, but also our third-party events. So we may have a school or a third-party group that are doing some sort of a fundraise, and they'd ask for some volunteer support. So we'll give volunteer support there. It's just getting bigger and bigger and bigger since COVID. Before COVID, I think we had 255 volunteers. We now have 2,500. We hit that last week. So,
wow. And what's that reach look like? Like, that's a lot of volunteers. So where are they located? How far is your reach?
Well, when I first started, it was people, when I first started 4 years ago, the nature of how volunteering was done, that it was all these different event managers and community managers. It was their networks, their friends and family. So it was very, very close. But our events are all over Sydney. I've even got a request in last week for an event that's in Dubbo. So we have got supporters all over New South Wales, but we actually go all over Australia because our hospitals are world class. So our children, our patients are coming from all over Australia, but sometimes we have a lot of patients that come from the Pacific, from New Caledonia, from all those sort of places. So our volunteers, we have volunteers all over Australia now, and that happened because of COVID. So when COVID came, we realised we had to what we're going to do. We're going to sit there and feel bad because there was no events, or we'll pivot and see what we can do. So we pivoted, and because we realised that a lot of our volunteers, their currency, like what they're paid, because I believe all volunteers are paid. You've heard me say it so many times.
Yes.
It's just figuring out what their currency, and COVID made me realise that a lot of volunteers' currency is social. So I was really worried about this might be the only social interaction people have is through their volunteering, and COVID stopped that. So we did a lot of things online, and we have virtual volunteering now. So we have volunteers in WA, Queensland, Victoria, ACT, volunteering for us, doing online research and things like that. So,
well, that's an excellent segue into, I was going to say, tell me a little bit more about the different volunteering roles that your volunteers partake in, both in person and virtually.
Okay, so first we used to do a lot of, peer-to-peer events. And sometimes, pull me up when I start talking in jargon, because I remember when I first started, everyone in fundraising, I'd never been in fundraising before this job, all talking this jargon, peer-to-peer, what's that mean? So it's, big running races and things like that, like City to Surf. So we have a lot of peer-to-peer. We have gala balls. So previously our galas, we would have, they'd pay models to work at our galas, but now we have volunteers. We've realised the importance, and you'll see this, we'll get into this with the standards about roles, the importance of what's needed of the volunteer. So we have like an essential criteria like you would in a job ad. We have volunteers inside our office, but not as much as we used to because of the trend of volunteers. It's very hard to get that long-term commitment. So we're doing a lot of short, sharp volunteering. So we still have volunteers in our office. We have volunteers in our office today. You would have walked past them. We have volunteers online doing research. We have, anything you can think of, we've got the volunteers for it. We have our volunteers going out to community events and assisting them. And if people can find a role, I can make it, whatever the volunteers. A lot of our ideas come from our volunteers, talking to our volunteers and finding out what their hidden gems are that you wouldn't know.
Yeah, I think that's really important, to be able to talk to the volunteers and find out what can they bring to the table. I think that taps very much into their motivations, and you talk about what their currency is, and that's something that I think is really important. Yeah, there is no financial reward, but being able to sit there and tap into a volunteer's motivation and being able to give back by allowing them to develop, to utilise, to just even dabble in something that they're particularly interested in could be a pay packet unto itself.
Exactly. Or it can be, a pathway to employment too. It can really help someone with a bit of, give you a bit of experience to see if that's the pathway that you want, or it might open up different opportunities for you. So volunteering is very, very important. Volunteering now, I think as a volunteer manager, you've got to be very, it's not an easy job. It's not a job that'll come easy. You've got to be thinking all the time now, because I was talking to a friend on the weekend and saying, post COVID, our time is so precious. We've all started realizing our family time is more precious since COVID. Our time on our own is precious. People are starting to think about themselves and their families. So I said to a girlfriend, imagine 6 hours out of your Saturday, taking that and going somewhere, like going to an organisation to do something. You'd have to really care, wouldn't you? So it's very important to give them that impact. I don't think I've talked in hours and saved cost savings. I've learned to talk more in impact and how you're rattling a tin is going to change the hospital experience of a young child in hospital. So I think that's really important.
I think that's a really good point too. The way you approach showing a volunteer the change, the impact that they're making, as opposed to you're helping the organisation. They know they're helping the organisation, but they want the end game in mind.
Yeah.
I think that's really cool. Talk to me a little bit about in your day-to-day. So you're obviously talking to volunteers regularly. You're trying to understand who they are, what they bring to the table. So tell me a little bit more about the day-to-day. You're obviously talking to the volunteers, finding out what they bring to the table, finding out, what their motivations are. But what else does your day-to-day look like in organising the events, in organising the fundraising? What's a day in the life of Kylie?
Wow. Well, there's literally no day that's the same. There's literally no day. Sometimes I wish for those days, but I thrive on. I think I thrive on a bit of chaos. Every day is different. Every day I have to sit there and look at what events are coming up and where I am on the event cycle. For instance, today I've got unpacking from Mother's Day that we did last week, but of course it's National Volunteer Week, and I've got a lot of prep for my volunteer thank you function on Wednesday, but I've also got a big event on Wednesday and I've got events on the weekend. So I've got a lot of preparation for the volunteer events. I've got an email that I'm sending out to all the volunteers. I regularly try and send out emails. I've got to be very careful because I have, there's 120 staff in SCHF, and of those 120 staff, probably half of them would utilise volunteers. So they'll be coming at me with events and things. I don't want to over email volunteers. So I try and keep them to, once a week, once a fortnight if I can.
Yep.
So at the moment I'm about to send an email out today and I'm thinking, please don't forget anything. But yeah, every day is totally different. I'm looking at my emails and you never know what's going to pop up. But it's, emailing our volunteers even at the end of our events, we send, their certificate. Everyone gets a certificate at the end of an event or if they've come into the office. And with that comes a link to a survey. And that survey is so important. Even though we have 2,500 volunteers, we are very personal with our volunteers.
Yep.
So I want to know, did you feel like you made an impact? If you did, what impact do you, because I want to know if we've portrayed the impact. I can say it, but it doesn't mean that they heard it. So we ask them what they feel, what was the best part of their day. Do they have suggestions on how I could do things differently? We read them and we change. Our gala balls, we do, probably 10, 12 gala balls a year. And we've been doing gala balls for just over 2 years. And I had gold the week before. And we raised $19.2 million on one night. Amazing. With 70 volunteers who are all teenagers.
Wow.
And we have such strict processes, but the thing is, we're going to change it for the next one. Nothing ever is the same. So even an event like Gold that we do every year, it's not even the same. So my days aren't the same because my events aren't the same because we're in the mindset of being making sure that we're checking in after every event with the event managers, with our volunteers, with our other volunteer management, the supervisors that were there on the night, debriefing and then changing things so we can have it even better next year.
Absolutely. All right, so to put something together like that, that's a lot of work. And obviously you're doing the right things to take it from what it was to now 19 million, yeah? Is that what... Was that the
19.2 million.
19.2. Don't forget the 0.2.
Yes, definitely.
And 70 volunteers, most of which were teenagers. Like that is mammoth unto itself and would require a lot of work and a lot of initiative. How do you fund your programs? Because obviously it takes a lot of time to put all this together and have you in the seat to be able to do this and the right people around you. So how do you fund it?
Well, the way we do, say Gold, you're looking at Gold and there's a lot of other organisations that do their galas and they would probably be shocked to hear that there's teenagers involved. And even our events team, when I brought it to them 2 years ago, was like, "Ooh, I'm not too sure. We'll give you a go."
Yeah.
And because it wasn't just any teenagers. That's what I said. Like, volunteer roles are specific. You've got to be careful. So the reason why, if you take the word teenager out, what they were was young people that lived in that environment.
Right.
So it was from the most affluent, one of the most affluent private schools in Sydney. We went there. Mm-hmm. And we got their students. So one thing I didn't have to teach them was how to speak to people, to wealthy people, because they come from that's their community.
Yes.
I didn't ask them how to hold themselves or dress, because that was
It was already
inherited in
behaviour.
Yeah. Also, they weren't shy to go up to someone and ask, to take a donation of $200,000 on their credit card.
Yeah, right.
Because it was probably their dad. Yeah, which actually does happen. Like, I'd have staff going and introducing the volunteers to the tables. Yep. We did this last year at Gold, and staff were coming and saying, "Were you tricking?" And I'm like, "Pardon?" They said, "You made me introduce them to their parents." Or this one got up and gave them a hug and asked where the parents were, and they're on the next table. So it's just thinking outside the box. It doesn't have to – everything that we've achieved, I've achieved in my role. It hasn't given me any though Sydney Children's Hospitals Foundation has realised the importance of volunteers and have put a full-time coordinator on with me.
Right.
So I do have a coordinator, Kylie, who is amazing, who's been with me since August last year. And I had Amy for the majority of the year last year as well, who was amazing as well. Mm-hmm. But still, it's just two of us doing, these amazing events with 2,500 volunteers. It's because we're thinking outside the box. We don't have enough events for 2,500 volunteers. I had a look at our figures, and we have had 2,800 volunteers separately volunteer over the last 3.5 years. So the reason why we need so many is because their volunteering is short and sharp now, and people don't want to. So rather than just wallowing and saying, "Oh, it's declining," we've just had to go in really hard on recruitment and just constantly recruiting.
Let's talk a little more about your recruitment. What sort of strategies are you using? Because that's a lot of volunteers to tap into, and it's not uncommon for people to say, "I have no idea how to get volunteers." So what strategies are you actually taking on? And in particular, what strategies are you taking on to get the right volunteers for the right event?
Okay. It's your podcast, but it's true. I'm going to the Centre for Volunteering. It's not another paid ad. But I did go to the Centre for Volunteering and get everything put on Seek. Mm-hmm. It has been the way to do it. Yep. But also having Avril at the centre teaching me about how to write an ad, because that's really important. Like before, when I'd put things and it wasn't getting much of an uptake, Avril gave me some suggestions and it made a difference. So Seek has been the way I have tapped into volunteers, making sure I get the right volunteers. Well, with some things, with large events, pretty much most volunteers can join, but what's important is the volunteer management. We had an event last week here at the hospital, a Mother's Day stall, and I had volunteers packing Mother's Day gifts for all the children. And I had a few people come up to me and go, "These volunteers, they're next level." And I said, "They're actually just a snapshot of Sydney. Our volunteers are a snapshot of our community. What makes these volunteers so amazing today is the staff that I had supporting the volunteers. Staff understanding that everyone volunteering today are human beings. Everyone volunteering today want to do a really good job. They've taken time out of their family, so it's really important that they make an impact. So the staff, it's not as much as giving them a task, walking away, coming back and saying thank you very much. That's not going to work. You have to make sure you're motivating your volunteers and talking to your volunteers, giving them a great day. They'll come back. They'll tell their friends about it. All of a sudden you start getting just ad hoc volunteer requests from their friends and families. That's the importance. It's not that I've found the perfect volunteers. It's that I've got the perfect staff working with volunteers. That volunteer management can sometimes be so undervalued, but it's the way, if you want to have these amazing volunteers, that's the way to get it, because there's not many jobs where I have an essential criteria, except for a lot of our high-end galas and things, but everything else, it's just our community. But I just make sure our staff are supporting and are supervising them correctly.
I think that's really important, because it's quite often to see the staff themselves don't see themselves as volunteer managers.
Definitely.
And whilst they may not have the title, they are volunteer managers, particularly on the day, in the lead up, anytime there is that interaction with the volunteers. And to make the volunteers feel welcomed, part of the team, not just the ad hoc team that comes in to sort the event out, I think is really integral to a successful program. And I think you've absolutely nailed it in what you're obviously nailing it in what you're doing. So, which leads me then to the Sydney Children's Hospital Foundation has nailed a major program, being the National Standards for Volunteer Involvement. Talk to me about why you embarked on that journey. And with 8 standards, it's not something that you do on a whim and a prayer and in 5 minutes. There is a lot of conscious thought that goes into it, planning, management, etc. Obviously, we do have you on an ongoing series of webinars talking about how you went about implementing each of the standards. But give us that sort of high-level view of the what, the why, and that kind of that high level how, without breaking right into it.
Yeah. Well, when I started in this role, as there was no one before me, I was told to bring in all these volunteers off Excel sheets around different, 3 different offices and put them onto a database and set up a program. That sounds really good. And also, by the way, can you do some policy as well?
Of course.
So it seems when you look at the standards and you read through the standards, not just the headlines with the dot points, but you read through right through that booklet, you'll see it's actually a really good scaffold to build a program. And that's what I used it as. So my first week of starting here, the first thing I requested was to buy the standards book from the Centre for Volunteering. I actually got that book. And I went through it and had a look and seen what we had or didn't have, and I would add to it. So it took 3 years. It took 3 years to implement the standards. It was a good year of actually going onto that portal. So we paid for the portal and then for a year adding evidence as we found things, changing a bit of policy, writing a bit into our business plan, and then adding that in as evidence and going to the next one. Yeah, but it was a way that we set up the program. So, I've seen people have said, oh, you've got a big program, but 3.5 years ago, it was just a couple of Excel sheets with, I think there was 600 names, but of those 600, only 250 of them had surnames. Right. So there was no compliancy or anything like that. And everything is paperless now. So we started just with some sheets, and then that's how I used the standards were actually the way to build a program. And if you read it, it actually is.
Now, this will probably seem as a bit of an obvious one based on all the success you've told me about, but how has implementing the standards changed the way you operate your programs, and in particular the success of Sydney Children's Hospital Foundation?
Well, how it has changed, it's highlighted things that we needed to change, and it has made us successful. It's given us what we know the program as being successful, we inside my organisation walls, we're all very proud of the volunteer program, but having implemented the standards, that has gone out into the ecosystem, and others are looking at us as trailblazers. And one thing I really want to get across to people is, yes, it was 3.5 years. But it was 3.5 years of steady doing it. It wasn't, oh my gosh, this is 3.5 years of pulling my hair out or anything. This is business as usual, and using the standards as well to grow this program. We grew it so well and so quickly because of these standards. We want others to see that it's achievable. And it wasn't because there was lots of money thrown at us, or we had temps in to help us, or anything like that. There wasn't any experts that we went to. It's doable. It's easy. Like reading the standards, it is, you need to comply with this. Okay, so I have to go and do this. Or, about the WH&S, well, I'll go and find out about WH&S, those sort of things. So you really want to support your volunteers, do your standards.
Yep. You mentioned there wasn't any money sort of thrown at you to help implement this. Now looking to the future and beyond, I suppose the first question I have is, do you already receive any funding from external sources, government, state, whatever the case may be? And do you see a possibility that now that you've implemented the standards, you've got this program that has a lot of eyes on it, has achieved a lot of success, do you feel it might make things a bit easier to get grants or funding down the line?
Well, we're just about to sign our first grant with the Centre for Volunteering about setting up a program on a shoestring budget. So we're really excited about that. Yes, I think we can see that in the future. I think we have a responsibility I do. I think I have a responsibility to the ecosystem about sharing the knowledge that I've acquired, because, I've been in this industry as a volunteer manager for about 13, 14 years. And I remember being so terrified when I first started, going to my first conference and hearing all these people talk and thinking, wow, I want people to realise that it is achievable. Even in a small org could do anything that I have done has not been because of money or funding. There's been no funding up until we're just signing the agreement today. So there's been no funding for us to achieve anything that we have, and that others can do it too. And the easiest way to do it is the standards. The easiest way to do it is the standards. It is a really good roadmap, a scaffold for your program. To have a safe and effective program is have a look at those standards.
Brilliant. All right, just to close off the podcast, what's the future hold for Kylie, and what's the future hold for the Sydney Children's Hospital Foundation?
Well, hopefully both together.
We'd like to hope so. I think the two are almost becoming a perfect entity.
That's it. The program is just, I would not know, because every 12 months it changes. It's evolving. I love being in such an organisation that encourages innovation and celebrates innovation. It's really freeing. To, now having someone that's having Kylie there to let me use this creative part of my brain to come up with these new and amazing ideas. It's exciting. I have no idea. I wouldn't even, last year, to tell you where I am now and the organisations now. It's so huge.
But I think that's really exciting. The unknown, but it sounds like a positive unknown.
Definitely.
There's not a lot of concern and dread on the horizon, and I think that's really important given the fact that we've come out of a couple of really bad years with COVID, that a program and a volunteer manager can sit there and look to the future and go, hey, things look all right. And it's helped to have the standards in place. I like to hope that the support of the Centre for Volunteering has helped, and your own initiatives and the way you think outside the square. And that's something I'm big on, is that thinking outside the square. Don't look at a problem as just a problem. What solution can you find that might be a little different?
Sometimes problems can be opportunities.
Couldn't say it better
change,
myself.
you know?
Beautiful. Excellent. Well, Kylie, thank you very much for your time, and thank you very much for letting us delve a little bit deeper into how the program works, what you do, and how you approach things within the program, and how you implemented the national standards. And most importantly, thank you very much for allowing us to pick your brains on a monthly basis with the National Standards webinar. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
You've been listening to Voices of Volunteering, presented by the Centre for Volunteering. For resources, tools, training and news, head over to our website volunteering.com.au.